Welcome to today's episode of Disability Warriors. I'm joined by Lou Szody, a wonderful coach at NeuroQueer. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So today we're learning a bit more about the work that you do at NeuroQueer. But before we do that, could you tell us a bit about what NeuroQueer is?
Yes, so NeuroQueer is an online community space that was formed by a collective of ADHD coaches, neurodivergent coaches, and our main goal is providing that community space and community support for queer neurodivergent people. But on our end, with the coaching piece, what we're focusing on is queering neurodiversity and queering coaching. And for us, that means focusing on and being aware of and mindful of how moving around in the world and existing as a neurodivergent person is, one, obviously different from being a neurotypical person, but different than it is for cis-het people. And so being able to provide that space and that support from a place of lived experience. Every single experience will be different, but there's enough overlap that we're able to find like that safety and support from each other.
Yeah, so that sounds really amazing. So as someone who works at NeuroQueer, what does a normal day at work look like for you?
So NeuroQueer is, for all of the coaches, right now, like a part-time endeavor. So we all have our private coaching practices, and can only speak for myself here for this question, but that looks really interesting and sometimes maybe a little chaotic because I'm a person with ADHD. And so that means that I am running my own practice and helping to run and support and provide coaching and facilitation for NeuroQueer. And I'm like, I have a family and I have a social life and I have all these things. And that's a big part of the challenge, is making things that function and run and are accessible for my clients and my community who are neurodivergent. But then finding ways to do it so that I can actually do it. Like, it has to be accessible for me.
Yeah.
So every day looks a little bit different. I have some days where I'm booked up and I'm only talking to clients and only doing group coaching and only facilitating for NeuroQueer. And then I have other days where I am not going to be able to balance like clients and promotion and marketing and doing taxes like all on the same day. So sometimes I have to block off my calendar. So like I can't talk to clients. Sorry, clients, you can't have access to me on this day. And spending that time like doing the businessy side of stuff.
That's a very hectic sort of work regime that you have there. So it's very interesting to learn about. So yeah, the next sort of question is, when it comes to work as a coach, what sort of methods do you use to help in your coaching process?
I'll answer it in two parts. So what I find works for us at NeuroQueer, and then what works for me doing one-on-one and group coaching in my private practice. What we find works the best at NeuroQueer is making sure that we are holding the community and group support as like equally important to the coaching element. So sometimes that means, as a coach, keeping the ego in check a little bit. Like, everybody is not here just to hear me talk or just to be educated by me. That group support element, it has to be equally important. And we find that there's not like a magic formula. It doesn't have to be like 50-50, but making sure that we're listening to the community. And so if we're in a space just with whatever is happening in the world and what is happening in everybody's different personal lives, if they need more intensive coaching, we can lean towards that for a little while. If everybody's kind of leaning towards a space where we're all too tired and there's too much going on for us to do any coaching, we just need each other, then we lean into that. So it's important for us to always be listening and adjusting for that. We find that making sure that we're offering variety in our group meeting topics and in the different events that we're offering is really important, so that we're not losing people. We're not losing people's interest. And with that, like particularly people with ADHD having like some struggles with object permanence and like a really low threshold for boredom, that we have to keep it interesting enough so people want to be there. And having some flexibility around people's different needs for structure. So we all have like some kind of need for structure, but everybody's is going to be different. So some people need a lot, some people need a little and cannot tolerate more than a little. So that's very challenging. And there's not like one way that we do that. It's a lot of us listening and finding out that we did it wrong today, and we'll try to do it better next week. And then most importantly is that we are depathologizing neurodivergence. So we are encouraging folks to understand and realize that there is nothing wrong with the way anybody's brain works. Neurotypical brains are great. Neurodivergent brains are great. And people can use whatever language they want and need around the way their brain works. So I say I have ADHD. I say I was diagnosed with ADHD. And that is sort of pathologizing, right, for me to say those words, but they work for me and my paradigm of how my brain works. So we really encourage folks to do that for themselves, but as much as possible, depathologize, really try to embrace that your brain just exists and it works and it's not a bad brain. And then in my private practice, I start with just like unconditional acceptance of all of my clients wherever they are. So for some people, they feel like they're doing okay and they just want to see if some things could be easier. Some folks are way on the other end of that spectrum and they're like, my career or my relationship, something in my life is like about to implode and I need something that will start to help me like today. Most folks are somewhere in the middle. And so it's meeting them wherever that is without shame or judgment on my end, so that they can just start to figure things out and unpack everything for themselves.
The work that you're doing at NeuroQueer and by yourself as well just really sounds incredible and amazing. But I would also ask, how effective would you say is the coaching processes and methods you use that you just like mentioned now as well?
I find them to be effective, and when I don't, I make adjustments. What I find to be the most powerful and the most like sustainable long-term helpful things for my clients are the depathologizing part and things that we do to develop self-efficacy. There's a statistic that by the time a neurodivergent child is 12 years old, that we've received 20,000 more negative messages than a neurotypical child. And that's anything from being told no, stop, to being told you're lazy, you're not doing it right. If you just applied yourself, you could be more like your siblings. So all of these like really ranging from sort of low stakes, no, stop what you're doing, to really big things that become integrated into our whole self-image and our self-talk as we get older. And so where the self-efficacy is important is that often when my clients start out in the coaching process, they don't have much self-efficacy. And so that means they don't have an inherent belief that they can set a goal and achieve it, that they can finish what they start, that they can be a good employee, they can be a great partner, they can be a safe and effective and loving parent. And I want to kind of caveat that with like, this isn't the toxic positivity kind of like, if I believe I can do it, I can do it. This is like integrating all of these experiences and neutralizing and redirecting and reframing our self-talk so that we're able to tell ourselves, I can do this thing. I know that because I've done it before. I practice it in coaching. And I know I could probably do some similar things with the skills that I use for this. So it's building and like reinforcing, like, you can do things. You can do whatever you need or want to do. And so when we're talking about like my coaching methods, I use all sorts of different methodologies based on what is going to be the most helpful for the individual person. But that's what the goal is going to be, is for them to leave me and to, I'm not going to say never need me again, because it is fine to come back and need some more help. The idea is for them to know that they can do it. And so even if we have to reschedule an appointment, even if they stop doing coaching, they're in a more secure and a safer place than they were when we started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that really sounds amazing, the sort of work that you're doing and how you use those methods and processes as well. Um, and I think it's definitely amazing that, it's a safe space. It's somewhere people with ADHD and who's queer as well can go to and, feel safe and work towards a good goal and get that more support that they need. Um, and I know that you did mention some stuff about statistics earlier as well. And I did some research as well when getting ready for this interview. So yeah, I have some statistics. So according to ADHD UK, they've estimated that 2.6 million people in the UK have ADHD. Out of that number, 1.9 million are adults. There's also an estimated number of 700,000 people in the UK who are diagnosed with autism. So as someone who has ADHD yourself and coaches people with ADHD and autism, what's the number one piece of advice you would give to someone who's just been diagnosed with ADHD or autism?
So hard to pick one thing. So I think I would start with find community wherever you can find it. And if that sounds scary and if that sounds like a big ask, a lot of neurodivergent and particularly queer neurodivergent people find that we have already sort of found each other. So I would just look to your friend groups first. And there's this sort of like phenomenon in neurodivergent friend groups where one person gets diagnosed or self-diagnosis, they figure it out. And then it's like this domino effect through the friend group where everyone else is like, wait a minute, that's ADHD, that's autism. I thought I was just weird. I've always gotten this feedback. And yeah. So it moves through the friend group and everybody ends up figuring out something or multiple somethings about themselves. So find that community and you might already have it. The other part though, I'll give you two, not just one,
That's okay.
is consider your identities and intersectionality, because our brains and our nervous system are processing everything around us all the time, and how you move through the world, how you have to move through the world based on who you are, is a big part of that. And so if you're queer, if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, if you're disabled, even more so if you are like visibly disabled and it's something that people perceive about you, you're going to have a much different experience than like a cis white man. You're going to have a much different experience from like a queer person has a much different experience from a cis het person. And just being and understanding that you're going to have to integrate your new knowledge of your neurodivergence into that whole sense and into those layers of your identity. That's going to be fun and scary and hard work, but absolutely worth it. And give yourself a break when you feel like your executive function or your emotional regulation are just not cooperating with you, because the reality is there are more things going on in the world that present like real danger for queer people, people of color. for everybody who's not just like the norm. I'm putting that in quotes. Everybody who's not the default. And your brain is trying to work with that and trying to get you through your workday and trying to do the dishes. And it totally makes sense. If it feels like it's harder for you than everyone else, it is. You're not imagining that.
Yeah, and I mean the thing you said about finding your people,
Mhm.
the friends I have, I mean a lot of my friends have ADHD and autism, and I know a lot of the time when I'm with them and hanging out, they'll be like, "Hannah, you have this," or like, "You seem like this," or little things that I do, and it's like maybe I do, maybe I have autism or ADHD, but I haven't like checked or anything. It's good to have that like system of friends who support you and look out for you. And I've always really appreciated that with any friend group I've had. And then like what you said about people who are different in certain ways have to sort of integrate that difference into their everyday life a bit more than other people do. And as someone who's in a wheelchair myself, I feel that constantly. And I know that a lot of the time people don't really understand it. Obviously, if it's a physical disability, they can't really fully understand the concept of it until they've experienced it themselves. So I've had that happen before. Like my mum became ill for a while and has a disability of her own now, and she understands it more than when I was a child. So I understand sort of integrating your life around other people who might not fully understand what you're going through or might be a bit different as well. So all of those things are really amazing. And yeah, this is really fun to sort of hear all of this and learn more. So yeah, I mean, you talked a bit about terminology and, certain terminology works for other people and doesn't work for certain people. I will say that the word neurodivergent, I know that a lot of people are hearing it more now, and it's been used sort of as an umbrella term when it comes to ADHD and autism. Would you say that people aren't receiving the right information about what neurodivergent is and therefore what ADHD and autism is?
Yes, I absolutely think people are not getting the right information. I think neurodivergent people we have a hard time finding and accessing information that is accurate and represents our lived experience. The whole narrative around neurodivergence it's based on how other people perceive us and how we inconvenience other people. And that's reflected in the diagnostic criteria. Like, of course, they ask you questions like, did you always get in trouble in school? Are you constantly told that you interrupt or talk over people? So it asks you from your own experience, but that's based on other people being like, ADHD kids are bad. Autistic kids are weird. They're the weird kids. And so it's all these things that are not, I would not have gone to my doctor and been like, I'm here because I'm annoying and weird. Like that's something that other people are reflecting. So neurodivergent people have been getting this bad messaging about ourselves throughout our whole lives. But then for neurotypical people, that keeps getting reinforced for them too in the cultural narrative. And the narrative is this dichotomy of like there's normal and there's not normal. And people fit into one of those categories. And I think like it doesn't matter if something is normal. Like all of human experience occurs on a spectrum, including neurodivergence. And what we're calling normal was defined by people who probably put themselves in the normal category. Like that was probably their starting point. So yeah, the messaging that everybody is getting around it, I think one is like wildly inaccurate most of the time. And then two has to do with not somebody's lived experience, but neurotypical people's experience of their experience being, well, I can behave, I can do the things these other people cannot. They're obviously a problem. So yeah, I feel like that was like, there's a lot of negativity in that answer, but I think that's a big, big cultural issue that nobody has a good solution for yet.
Yeah, I think when it comes to all these things, it's in the foundation. It's really hard to take it out of the foundation without everything falling apart. So people don't really want to. Because like I do a lot of research to do with disability for this project, but not only for this, but also schoolwork in general, other subjects. And there was this one book I was reading about disability and how someone quoted it, how they perceived people with disabilities. They said people who have disabilities or who are different are imbeciles or idiots or mindless people. And it's things like that that started us off. Of course, it's going to keep going through generations unless we change it, but we can't really have a full impact because it's embedded in our foundation. So it's very upsetting to see that. But yeah, I agree with what you were saying. Yeah, so for the next half of our interview, I asked people online and in person whether they had any questions relating to ADHD or autism. So I have a few written down, and I thought we could use them as sort of a fun and interesting Q&A.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I'll ask the first question then. So the first question is, do you think there is stigma when someone says they have ADHD?
Yes, absolutely. I think that neurotypical people, and particularly like workplaces and education spaces, have kind of one picture of ADHD, of the ADHD employee or the ADHD kid, and that it's mostly negative. So even though I make it part of my work to depathologize neurodivergence, we'll pathologize it for a second here. So if I were to tell someone I have this neurological or neurodevelopmental condition, it makes it difficult for me to focus. It makes it so that I have to watch movies with the subtitles on, or I can't follow it. I have no idea what's going on, cannot follow a movie plot. It correlates very highly with migraines. So that's really inconvenient. And it makes it difficult to regulate my emotions sometimes. Oh, I called it a neurodevelopmental condition and I listed all these like ways that it affects me. I'd probably get some sympathy for that, or empathy for that, or understanding for that. But usually I just say, I'm ADHD. And I get a very different response where other neurodivergent people go, great, me too. But neurotypical people, and especially people in positions of power, managers, teachers, those folks suddenly get very concerned. Oh my gosh, ADHD, it's going to be real hard for me to work with you. So yes, you are not imagining any stigma that you're receiving.
Yeah. And I would say that for myself or my friends, they've told me about experiences similar to that when it came to either teachers or bosses that they had when they tell them that they have ADHD, and then the boss is not really being very sympathetic or accommodating to their needs. And it's always just really bugged me. It's like, you should be accommodating to this person. They have ADHD. I have neurodivergent way of looking at things. That's not anything bad. It's just something different. So you shouldn't really ostracize someone based on that. And as a teacher, like, I'm practicing to be a teacher, get qualifications and all of that. And I've worked with kids who have ADHD or who have autism. And I actually prefer working with kids with special needs because I find that their outlook on everything is just so much more fun and interesting. And I love working with them. And I feel like that's the sort of teachers and people in this world that we need. Someone who will look at someone who's different and think, wow, what can you teach me today? Like, what can you tell me about the world? Looking at someone's point of view from someone else's perspective is always an amazing thing to do. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And something that people don't consider is that the way that systems are built are disabling. But in the doing of that, we're providing accommodations for neurotypical people, for able-bodied people. We're accommodating them. So the things that we have set up as like the default, as the way that things just work, and everybody else is supposed to just try to fall in line or not be employed anywhere. We're accommodating people who need or want those things. So I think everybody is kind of missing a part of the picture when we're like, if things just are the way they are and it's really inconvenient to provide accommodations for people to fit in here, you're already accommodating the people who are there and who function in it. It's just like lucky for them, the accommodations are the ones they need.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to accommodating anyone with disability, it's always like they seem to take it as if it's more work than it is. It's small things. Like, I know that the area I live in, there's an ice cream shop, and it was built within the last 5 years. So they should, by law, have accessibility there. But they have steps in their front area and not really any proper communication to ask if you can help me get inside. So I know they have a ramp, but it's things like that maybe just build a sort of slope or ramp. You didn't need stairs and small things. And I know that the UK, there's a lot of inaccessible places, and I face that every day when I'm going out or if I'm planning a trip, especially because the trains and everything, they're quite old. So we only have a certain amount of trains that are accessible. And it's always a hassle on me. And then I just look at people who are able-bodied, who can just get on to any train they like. And I'm very envious of that because I want to be able to do that. But I shouldn't have to be envious of someone who can just get onto a train when they like. I should be able to do that as well, even if I do have a disability. And it's things like this that just frustrate me a lot. Because I recently went to Dubai, and it's a fully accessible place. There's a ramp next to every single step of stairs. There is lifts everywhere. The lifts always work. There are accessible trains, all of these things, and they were built recently as well because it's quite a new built country. So it's just things like this we could integrate into society if we really wanted to, but a lot of people don't want to. So it's very upsetting to see that. But yeah, the next question is, what is it like living with ADHD and what challenges are posed by it?
That's such a good question. I would say, so I'll start with having undiagnosed ADHD or just not knowing that about yourself yet. It feels like, I'm totally stealing this answer from a meme that I've seen, but it feels like you're playing a video game on hard mode without realizing it's set on hard mode and everybody else is winning. And you just keep like getting stuck and you keep losing. And everyone around you who's winning keeps like, why is this so hard for you? Just do this. It's easy. Like, just push the buttons. And then when you know, and when you're diagnosed, it's still in hard mode, but at least now you know that. Now you can figure out which buttons to push. So now you know, I got to use the remote control differently, or I got to use the keyboard differently, because doing it the same as everybody else was not getting me to the end. The challenges are, I think, probably the biggest one is exactly what we just talked about, that that systems are built to be disabling for certain people. And so you might do okay at home or in your friendships or in these spaces where things are either set up for you or just kind of neutral. But when things are set up for neurotypical people specifically, that's when you're really going to struggle. And the struggles are going to be around like your executive function and your emotional regulation. Something that folks with ADHD tend to experience is RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria. And that's a really big and sometimes like destabilizing experience. So it's the experiencing rejection very, very intensely, or sometimes it's perceiving rejection where it hasn't actually occurred. And it can also be anticipating rejection before it's happened, when it maybe it will happen, maybe it won't, but we're already feeling it in a big way and making choices based on not even wanting to encounter that. So these really big emotional experiences and like destabilizing and demoralizing experiences. And it's not all of it is bad. So like neurodivergent folks sometimes experience hyperfocus. So having that experience of like, I haven't been able to focus or engage with something at work, or I haven't been able to get started on my homework. But then when the deadline is looming, or when I discover something about it is actually interesting and it's not just going to be a grind, then suddenly I get started, and then like 27 hours later, I have not stopped. And I'm like, well, now I'm exhausted, but that was pretty cool. I really enjoyed that time. So, and that has its good points and its bad points. Like if you're engaged in hyperfocus for a really long time, like you might not feed yourself, so you might not feel well once you're done. But a lot of folks experience it as like supportive and engaging and a relief because you finally got the thing done and the deadline is 5 minutes away. So these different things that we can experience.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I mean, like you said, the meme, I think I've heard of those memes before as well. So it's just like, to be honest, a lot of the things that I do know about ADHD and autism comes from watching a lot of TikToks from people who have ADHD and autism, their accounts, and it's always like, this seems very accurate, and then sometimes like, this seems like something I would do as well. It's like, this is interesting.
Yeah, it's so important to get the perspective of a lived experience and not just what the diagnostic criteria say about you.
Yeah, I think if you find someone who has ADHD or autism, and you sort of talk to them and you learn more about it, it's always you learn better from it. You learn something very more authentic and an actual, like you said, lived in experience, which is better than what a lot of people who are neurotypical just write about what ADHD and autism is. So I always think that's really good. I think there's a British thing back in the 90s. They were fighting for the Disability Act, and while they were doing that, a lot of the time they would have sort of channels to do charity days, and they'd bring people on who have disabilities, or they would talk about people who have disabilities without actually consulting them. And from that, there's this thing called "Nothing About Us Without Us," and I think that's a very strong thing.
Nothing about us without us, first of all, amazing. But yeah, then also the way that things get shaped by people who are talking about people and not including them is often very like infantilizing.
Yeah, and I think we would always get better media if it's written or consulted by someone who has that particular stance on life. For example, if there's a certain people who have disabilities and we're including that into the media, always check with them, always ask them, is this like accurate? What do you think? Things like that. I think it would just really shape a better view of the world, and it would give more accurate information rather than something that's just not what we live through or what we go through on a daily basis. So things like that is really good to integrate into our society and into media as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So the next question is, what are some signs of ADHD?
So I think I'm going to answer this from what you would experience yourself and not like what your doctor would tell you are the signs and symptoms of ADHD. Um, so it can feel like before diagnosis, before self diagnosis, it can feel like other people are just miles ahead of you. So in school, in career, in your relationships, it feels like other people are meeting deadlines at work and getting promotions. Other people are managing their household, and other people are punctual, and other people don't get flustered when they make mistakes. And it feels like you're not doing those things, like you're not meeting these milestones. Um, it can feel like this is from my own experience, but it feels like things are just like happening around you, and you don't actually have any control or agency in it. So things happen and there's chaos, and you're like, I was just here. I don't know why things keep catching on fire right next to me. The fact that I'm here is a coincidence. I don't know what's happening. So just that feeling of like things are overwhelming, things are chaotic. I don't know what I'm supposed to do about that. How are other people dealing with this? And if you have ADHD, it turns out other people are not having that experience, and that's how they're dealing with it because it's not happening with them. But that, I think, sums up what it feels like when you don't know yet.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, this is your lived-in experience. This is what you've gone through, and yeah, it's definitely something interesting. And I've heard the exact same from other people who I know who have ADHD or autism, and I honestly just even certain things I experience on a daily basis, just in general life, when it comes to even my disability or certain things I do that some of my friends think might be autistic or ADHD traits that I might have. I think, yeah, this is definitely something that someone else just doesn't experience. I'm like, why don't you experience this? Like, isn't this normal? Or isn't this something that just goes on in life? So yeah. And then the final question is, what are signs to look out for? And I think we could relate this to even ADHD or autism. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely some overlap with the previous question. So if you feel like other people are just like excelling, and you keep feeling stuck, and like no matter how hard you work and how hard you try, you are not getting the benefits that they are getting. Or if you have that sense of things being overwhelming or out of control around you, if you experience frequent exhaustion or frequent burnout, I think those would be the main ones. I think anything else I could list are things that we're sort of able to conceptualize in the context of knowing that we have ADHD or autism. So, for example, like frequent sensory overwhelm. I would not have said that happened to me even in the first year or two of understanding that I was neurodivergent. So I'll put that out there, but with a grain of salt. Frequent sensory overwhelm and sensory shutdown. It's okay if you're not sure what that is or you don't think it applies to you. If you figure out you're neurodivergent, you can think about that in that context later.
I will say that, for example, my sister, I think there's a lot of things that she does that I might think relate a lot to what I've heard about ADHD. And a lot of the time, I think, well, she actually recently went through a sort of diagnosis process and at her school. And I think at school level as well, they offer quite a few assistance, things like extra time or a scribe if you need writing help, which I had when I was younger. But I know that when it comes to people who have ADHD, not a lot of the time they are recognized as having ADHD or get diagnosed. and then they're struggling even more. And I know that the people who are diagnosing people with ADHD, or who even in schools actually, who are just like observing you to see if you do need this support, they don't usually have ADHD or are neurodivergent themselves. So a lot of the time, people who have ADHD or who are neurodivergent get swept under the rug and don't actually receive that support that they need. And I think it's really important that they do receive it, because it will help them in the long run, but they don't, which is really frustrating to see happen, because I know that she went through that process and they denied her any extra support. But I think it would be very beneficial for her. And as someone who's grown up with her, who's seen her every single day, I know a bit better than they do that what she experiences at home and stuff is very different. And they just go from a quick hour process of what they've seen might not actually be the full picture. So it's always not very accurate of what they've got in terms of information about someone. So a lot of people who have ADHD or autism are either undiagnosed or not receiving the support they need. I actually, there's a statistic that says people who have special educational needs in the UK don't actually have an EHC plan, which is a education, health and care plan. So they're not receiving SEN support, even though they're diagnosed with a special educational need. So it's things like this that's very damaging in our system.
Yeah, absolutely. And here in the US, there's a lot of similar issues, and one with like ADHD in particular, and kids, young kids, is that it's seen in the context of like a behavioral problem often. And so there are a lot of kids who don't have the accommodation and supports that they need in place, even though they qualify for them, because it's seen more of like an explanation. So it's like, this was a bad kid. They're frustrating for the parents and their teachers to deal with. Oh, this diagnosis explains it. But that's the end of it. We have an explanation up to why this kid is so difficult. We're not even going to move on to the next step, which is like, kids don't misbehave for no reason. They're just responding and existing. Yeah. And then and the way that disability laws in the United States are worded usually is that places have to provide reasonable accommodation, and reasonable gets pretty subjective. So oftentimes things don't get provided because they're not reasonable. There's no like legal definition of what reasonable means. There's a lot of holes in there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when it comes to providing the proper care and support someone needs, and what the law says, it will, like you say, a lot of holes. It's very subjective. There's a lot of loopholes as well. Terminology can be seen in 50 different ways, and that's never really helpful for someone who needs support but can't access it because maybe they qualify in one way or just are short by one thing of the diagnosis. And it's not really fair that society sees it that way, but that's what we live through. So it's upsetting. But yeah, those are all the questions for the Q&A. I will ask my own last and final question, which is, what are some of NeuroQueer and your own personal future goals?
Great question. So one of NeuroQueer's future goals is to partner with other groups and communities that serve queer and neurodivergent people so that we have a safety net in place for everybody. I was going to say like millions of people. I don't know if that's right. Millions of people who need this kind of support and don't have it and don't even know that it exists, don't know that it's an option. And then there's going to be times where there might be another community that they serve queer and neurodivergent people, but they specialize in something that we don't, or vice versa. We're really good at something that they don't feel equipped to offer. So partnering with people who are interested in working with us so that we're giving people what they need. We're providing things and we're catching people who have historically just fallen through the cracks. One of my personal goals with my practice is that I have previously provided some cultural competency training around queer culture to like small businesses in my area, and I want to be able to grow that. So I want to provide that to larger companies and branch out from like my little community in Colorado. So it's up on my website, but it's not something that I've not put the effort into like promoting it that I have into my coaching thus far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds really amazing. And yeah, well, that's today's episode. Thank you so much again for being on the show. It was an honor meeting you, and I really hope you enjoyed it.
You too. Thank you so much, Hannah. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thank you. Take care. Good luck
Yeah,
with your projects.
thank you. Yeah, so I'll end the recording now.